things were bad. We acknowledge that they were bad, but now we're out in the desert and things seem to be even worse than how we had it. And so, they're beginning to experience their struggles, their common everyday strifes and issues and conflicts are arising. And so they are bringing their issues to Moses. And if you guys remember, Moses had a family, he had a wife and children, but he had left them with his in-laws. He had left them in the land of Midian. And so this is the part where Jethro, his father-in-law, has come to him from Midian, and he has brought his daughter. So he has brought Moses' wife and his children to him. And he has heard about all the things that have happened to the people of Israel. And he's, so I'm summarizing this part because we're not going to read this part. But he's excited about that. But then he kind of gets to see a day in the life of Moses, and so he sits down and he watches Moses. And this is the part that I'd like for us to read. So if someone would volunteer themselves, we're looking at Exodus chapter 18, verse 13. And if someone could read, let's see, down to the end of the chapter.
And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses set to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning until the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he had did to the people, he said, "What is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening?" And Moses said unto his father-in-law, "Because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another. And I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws." And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, "The thing that thou doest is not good. Thou wilt surely wear away, both thou and these people that is with thee. For this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it all by thyself alone. Hearken now unto my voice. I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to goeward, that thou mayest bring the causes unto God. And they shall teach their ordinances and laws, and shall show them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. Moreover, they shall provide out of the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them, to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of 10. And let them judge the people at all seasons. And it shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. So shall it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. If thou shalt do this thing, and God commanded thee to do so, then shalt be able to endure. And all these people also go to their place in peace." So Moses hearkened the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said.
Perfect. Right to there. I think the rest after that is a repetition of what already went forward. He listened and he did, and it explains he did exactly as Jethro basically suggested him to do. Does someone want to attempt to sum that up in their own words?
It seems like Moses was in charge of day-to-day decisions because they sought him as like the final word, because they paralleled him to God, and godly decisions rather. And so every day he would have to help them decide between things, and it was wearing down on Moses, and his father was able to see it. And so his father-in-law is basically like, "Hey, you don't need to do this alone. Maybe you can change it up a bit." I think.
All right, that's a great summary. I think you hit some really good points. One of the main things that you highlighted was Moses had all the power, right?
Mhm.
He had all the decision making. And that was in part because people really trusted him, right? But he was also very much alone, right? Let's put Moses. I almost put it in Spanish yesterday. We were sharing this. We were doing this in a recognizing the stranger training with voice yesterday, and for the first time ever, I did a simultaneous translation. We had the little earpieces on and everything, and the whole time I was like, "Is anyone actually hearing us?" Out of this microphone, but they did. They're sure. So he had all the power, consolidated power. But then you said, when he listened to Jethro's advice, what happened? There was shared power. Right? So it goes without saying that he was not alone, right? They were in kind of in solidarity with each other. Anybody, any other points that you might highlight there that you thought were significant?
I think it took an outside perspective for him to see that that was starting to weigh on him, and he shouldn't have had all that power to begin with, because
Okay. Nobody
nobody else had pointed out to him up until that point, obviously.
So kind of the benefit of having, outside counsel.
Mhm.
Good. I'm gonna add to that, being accountable to other people, right? When he invited his father-in-law in, he was inviting himself to be scrutinized by his father-in-law, and those around, so there was shared accountability. And those on Zoom too, you're welcome to share any points you think we might have missed.
For fear of jumping ahead, but what about trust?
Trust, okay.
Trust that, father-in-law meeting Moses and trusting him and him trusting God and them trusting each other, and there's a whole lot of trust.
So there was
Accurate.
mutual trust here. Yeah, mutual trust going on here. Whereas over here, it was a real, I want to say a real specific, there was trust, but it was a very specific trust that meant a whole lot of other distrust,
Right.
with everyone else.
He focused too much on his trust in God that he didn't
Yeah.
put trust in his people.
Right. Focused trust meant a greater distrust of everyone else. I'm gonna see if I can find a better marker here. This one is flipping out on me. If you were to, thanks. If you were to maybe bring this into today's context, whether it's in the church context or in, it doesn't have to be, it could be, in the work context, or any other context. This idea of dividing out into groups, how could you envision that happening? yesterday we role played, but I'll just let you all know that last time I tried to do a role play here, they weren't too keen on the idea, so. But I'll tell you guys what happened with these role plays, because I was really fascinated. They looked so different. We had a Spanish speaking group and we had an English speaking group. And what I found really interesting, you might find this interesting, Erin, is the English speaking group did an almost almost like a literal acting out of the text, I mean, literal in the sense of how we understand it when we read it. I mean, obviously making it totally historically accurate or anything, we didn't do that, but they did that. And then the Spanish speaking group did like a kind of like a contemporary version of it, and they they brought in, we had donuts that were being served at this training, and so they had this person come with a children, like their complaint was, I've got these kids in my home and they just won't stop fighting with each other. What should I do, Father? And then this was at a Catholic church, and so they were coming to the priest and they were complaining to the priest about all this fighting in the household, and so they come in and the priest says, well, here's my two helpers, my two co-counselors sitting here. And so the first thing the priest said was, why don't you attend to them, bring them water, bring them, so they come up with donuts and they come up with water, and they're like totally full on giving this full treatment to the person. And it was really interesting because what they decided was to make it where he assigned one person, one of his co-counselors, was to be a specialist, in children's issues, and would be going and speaking with the children and working with them on, how to deal with their issues as children, and the other one was specialized in marriage and family issues, and so they were going to be speaking with the husband and the wife because they were having issues with each other as well, based on the issues that the kids were having. And then they were all going to come together and they were going to come back to the priest, and they were kind of report back to the priest on what the issues were that were going on. So these were totally different acting out, and they were both very good and both hit kind of the main points. But one thing that was interesting in the English speaking dramatization is that they decided to organize the groups of people by common concerns. So that's not mentioned in the text, but the text is just by groups of people by numbers, right? But they decided, no, by common concern. So if y'all have this one concern, well then take 5-10 people and come together based on that common concern. And then if you have a larger group of people with those similar concerns, put them together, and then you can together look for common ground to solve those problems together. And then any of those issues that just is out of your hands, it seems to be too great, then take that to Moses and Moses will work on it. So that's kind of some of the wisdom that came out of the space from yesterday that I really appreciated. I liked that idea of grouping by common concerns. I thought that was interesting. Any other ideas coming out of this? For those of us that were here before, we had talked about, I'm going to see if I can find it back here in my sheet. We had talked about two different kinds of cultures. We had talked about this power paradigm, and we had talked about the power over relationship versus the power with relationship. And if you look really closely at this dynamic of Moses over the people, what does that look like here of these two models?
Yeah, I mean, he had absolute power over.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And okay, I'm not saying that Moses was repressive or violent or any of those things, but he had the total control, right? These are the things that go with that, right? But he was handing down all the judgment, you know, he was making all of the decisions, right? Whereas when he takes on the advice of Jethro and calls on, there's another piece, when they say to break it down into groups, you know, of thousands and hundreds and tens, he's very specific. Jethro is specific in saying, make sure that the person who is over them is a very capable person, right? You know, not just anybody, but a capable person. So recognizing the leadership qualities of that person, right? And so you can see this being a shared, a cooperative, and what we call this more relational culture here. And there's definitely more time here to hear the story, to hear the person, to hear the people, to hear and be relationship. There's more possibility of that here than there is in this, because here you just get worn out, right? Here you're able to build and strengthen, and I think we had also talked here about thick and thin institutions. You know, this is you just get all the life sucked out of you because you're all just waiting around all day long for this one person, and then that one person, Moses, is completely drained of all energy as well. So when we take this paradigm and we talk about, well, we want more of a relational culture when we are in our institution of the church, and we want to build power, and we want to be able to organize effectively in the church or in our community. We want to push into this relational model. How do we do that? One way that we do that, we talked about, was doing like one-on-one meetings with people and doing house meetings with people. And I didn't get to do this last time because we were drawing up, or we started to think about the letter, but it's a very complex. Just kidding, not so complex. This is what I loved about it. Drew it out for us. So here's my power analysis. It's very complex stuff here, you guys. So when you're listening to a person, you know, one-on-one, and you're listening, you know, for what are their interests, what drives them, and you're wanting to have that curiosity for what they're all about. You know, you want to go into, like I mentioned before, where do they invest their time and their energy and their money? You start to ask questions into that, and we do that so that we can genuinely get to know them and just kind of get to know, like, what is their heartbeat, you know, what makes them move. And so we had the opportunity in the training to do this. You know, you can do it in a one-on-one, you can do this in house meetings, but you also do this as you are thinking in your community how the relationships work between people. So, you know, like pick a public figure maybe that you know, and you want to think more about how they, you know, what makes them tick, you know. And so I was trying to think of someone that I knew of, you know, in the public sphere, and so I picked JoBeth Hammond. And I don't know tons about JoBeth, and so I thought I'd like to know more about JoBeth. And so I picked her, and everyone else at the training picked someone else, and we kind of went through and we tried to think of what are things that, you know, really drive this person. And so I wrote down things about her, you know, that she's, for example, she's city councilwoman, and she still is, right? City councilwoman, Ward 6. And then we just wrote simple things like where she went to school at, Oklahoma Baptist University, class of 12, I think is what it was. Family and community services was her area of studies. And then I looked at, okay, she's married to Marty Kiersey. I looked at things like, well, let's see, she's been really connected with grassroots programs. She served with the Episcopal. I did not know this about her. Episcopal Service Corps.
Where'd you get your information from?
I just went off of her website.
Oh, okay.
Her, official website in Chicago. She's big on police accountability. And these are just very generic things. I'm not going to go super in depth on her. She's been big on affordable housing. What else do you guys know about Joe Beck?
She volunteers with Commonwealth Urban Farms, she's farming, gardening, sustainability.
Urban Farms. What's the one thing I always think about when I think about Joe Beck? One of the first things.
Biking.
Yes.
Yeah, not non-automobile forms of transportation.
Yes, very much. So into the bicycle infrastructure, right?
And the bus.
And the bus, public transportation.
How about that? Not many people do that.
Yeah,
That have a job and everything, I mean,
right.
get back and forth to work.
I know she's big on mental health, bilingual town halls and materials. Anyway, so these all things about her. Now you can do this with any person. And she's a journeyman like friend.
Did she do that bicycle because of environmental concerns? She's saving the environment. Okay.
In part for environmental concerns, just and then just more affordable transportation around town. Not everyone can afford to have a vehicle. So what does it look like to build the infrastructure in the town, in the city, so that people who are on lower income people can afford to move around the city. So she's supporting that movement. So this is where these are the things that kind of move her. Some of the things that move her. She's obviously a much more complex person than this, but some of the things that move her, right? And so what you do is kind of look at, well, where are our energies, or if we're looking at what do we want to connect with Joe Beth on? And of course, we connect with Joe Beth on a number of things, but you could pick someone that you might think you have nothing in common with. and this was another thing that they encouraged us to do, is find someone that you really think, oh, yes, Erin, that time has come for you. And say, my gosh, what on earth could I possibly have in common with this public figure, and because one of the things that they so often say and repeat in organizing is you're going to help me out, because I always turn to Terry.
A little bit more.
Yeah, I'll give you more. I'll end up probably saying the whole thing is no permanent friends, no permanent allies, no permanent enemies. Is basically the idea. The idea being that you're not going against people. You're not making this personal. You're not out there looking for enemies. What you're looking for is to find common ground with people and to see what you can build together. And so, okay, you don't go to the same church together. You're not on the same political party together. You don't feel the same about so many different things. But maybe one thing that you can get together on is, you agree that there need to be more parks in the community, and so, okay, am I capable of going into this person's office and telling them, thank you for having, for putting up initiatives for more parks, in this area of town, or now can we do this for other parts of town, not just your part of town, or whatever, so this is the not so complex way to just kind of build out a person. And so one thing I would encourage you guys to do is to do the stick person for yourself, and take a look at yourself and say, oh, where am I investing my time and my energy and my money? Like, is it going where I really want it to go? Am I intentional about it? Am I being strategic about it? We talked about being strategic before. Not having house meetings just to have them. And again, remembering that house meetings are a space for churches to listen to the heartbeat of the people in your church and hear what's going on with them, asking an open-ended question like, what are the challenges that you are facing in your family? This was the question we asked yesterday in our house meetings that we did. What are the challenges that you're facing in your families today? And so the topic that came up a lot in the house meeting that I was a part of was children, particularly children mostly from the ages of like middle school to like early 20s, was kind of like the relationship of parents with that age group of children, and adult children as well. And so there was a lot of pain. There were deep stories around that. And then there were times when it was like, we kind of really went way down the rabbit holes a bit in it. I was supposed to be leading this house meeting. It was my first time leading a house meeting. And so I was just sitting there so excited that I could finally sit. It's not very often that I get to sit in a space and listen to everybody speaking in Spanish. And so I get really excited when I get into these spaces. And I just want to let people do whatever the heck they want to do, and I don't like to guide too much. And Sandra came over and she was like, so remember what we're supposed to be doing here right now? And I was like, oh yeah, so first everybody present yourself, let me know who you are, what church you're a part of, and remember what the question is, what are the issues concerning us right now, in our families right now. It's really not, one of the mothers had kind of gone off on a tangent about the family of somebody in the the family. And I was like, okay, well, we don't need to worry about them. Just, we're just talking right now about your kids and what is kind of on your mind about them in that area. And so one of the issues that came up was the topic of, since I'm in a new job in the mental health field, working with peers, we talked about the difference of, it was one thing to have a parent intervene with a kid, and so many kids in the middle school to up to forever age don't want to hear what their parents have to say when they're coming at it from the angle of, listen to me, I know what I'm talking about, and kids are like, I've heard that before so many times, and I'm tired of hearing it. It's very different when a young adult can hear someone saying, look, as a friend, as a peer, as someone who's kind of come alongside them, they hear, it could be the exact same stuff, right? But they're hearing it differently because it's coming from a different voice, and so we were just talking about, ways to, and a house meeting is not a place where you have to find the answers for anything. We were just talking about how interesting it would be to see if we could get together with other parents and who have also issues with kids and see where these, things with peers might bubble up, if there was a possibility for something like this in the church. So I was the only one who wasn't actually a part of that particular church. So I was a little bit on the outside there, but it was cool to hear them there was something sparking there. There was energy for this, and people were interested in moving in that direction. So it was pretty cool. So draw the stick figure, draw it for yourself. I'm not saying right now, but it'd be interesting to do that, take take the time to see where that leads you, where that goes. When we talked about the house meetings, you could think of them as an example of Jethro's advice, of breaking things down, into groups of the thousands and the hundreds and the tenants. A good house meeting is somewhere between 5 and 10 people. It's not more than that. If you only have 30 minutes to talk to people, probably 5 people is enough. If you have an hour, okay, 10 people, but not the other way around. If you have 10 people, don't set aside 30 minutes because you're not going to really be able to hear people's heartbeat, in just 30 minutes. But when you have these house meetings, you can start to identify not just people and their interests and what moves them, like, oh, these are the things that are on our hearts right now, but also hear which people are interested in doing something about it. Like, I have this issue, but I also have some ideas, and I want to do something, and I have energy, and I'm itching to do something, and I've got either a skill set or whatever, or I know some other people, or I can put together some more people to meet on this idea. Like, that is a skill in itself. Being able to get more people together to come up and talk about something is a skill. And so there's just my other really fancy power map. I was really excited when they told us we were going to learn how to do power analysis. I was like, oh, it's going to be like, wow, like the big thing. And this was it. It was this big person and this big puddle thing right here. Power analysis. The example was the church. And usually, this is not joy, but usually in the center of the church, in terms of power and decision making, you would have a pastor, or in some churches, another body that holds a lot of decision making power, like the elders, right? Or a board of some sort, or, And then moving out from there, what might you have? Outside of that, deacons, maybe deacons, okay. Who else would be in that similar staff, maybe deacons and staff?
We have a lot of committee people, like, this committee does this committee.
There's no committee room, but I know there's doubles in there, just about everything. Committees. Yeah. Outside of staff and committees and deacons and everybody, what else comes out here? And this doesn't have to be like a total science, so don't. But what else might be out there?
Your youth pastor, per se.
Oh, are you?
Is in one or the other, or both.
Yeah.
Because he's under the pastor, but yet he's into the outreach with the younger group.
Sure, I'm gonna put him kind of in the second circle here. Youth pastor.
Worship leaders.
Yeah. We can put the big bishops in here.
Different churches, different
Sure.
callings of the
Yeah,
same position, but a different name they use.
yeah, absolutely. So we've got that, worship leaders, bishops, youth pastors, elders, we've got deacons, staff, committees. How about like ministries?
Children's church.
Like children's church and all of that. So I'm just gonna say ministries to include all of those. But I was thinking there's one that's really important.
I'm thinking about family legacies, like
Okay,
who's been around?
uh-huh,
Like the founders of the church.
like long-term families, um, there's kind of like a term for. Isn't
Well,
there?
there are church, yes, charter members. Yeah, yeah.
Be the ones that started the work, more or
Yeah,
less, in
You know,
a small group.
like groups.
yeah.
I'm just slow.
Yeah, that just makes it old.
Yeah, because definitely in terms of decision making, as you move on out further and further, you'd have your regular members. And then, you might go out further more from that and you'd have like your Christmas.
You have a treasure.
Yeah,
That would be stacked and.
your treasurer would be up here, yes, but definitely thinking of your finance committee, for example, is huge.
Secretary.
All that and stuff. So, and then out from your Christmas and Easter, people, even, another ring I'm thinking of here.
The ones that are members by name only. I mean, we have.
Like
several-
nominal.
No, I mean, well, we have several people that when you ask them what church they go to, they say our church.
Uh-huh.
I'm a member there, but they're never there. But that's, they cling on to that membership title so they can kind of come and go as they want to. So,
Maybe like nominal members, think
Yeah.
about attendees.
it's almost as if they want to be invited to their own church.
And then even further out, you would have the community, because the church is part of a community. And there are some things in a church that the community around it sometimes does have some decision making, over, if you have a shared fence or I don't know.
Fireworks
Yeah.
festival.
Yeah, a block party, or something that you're wanting to do. And so, when, again, going back to the Jethro, advice of having these groups of, the thousands and the hundreds and the tens, Boyce talks about having a core, now this is for Boyce, but having a core membership, and they take that as a crosscut from this whole thing. So coming all the way out, just put it in a different color. But so that you have a little bit of representation from each one of those areas. And that way you have like a real healthy representation from your church. So you're not always just getting the same, just a pastor doing, the pastor winds up being the representative for all the different things.
Yeah.
And all, things like, because that's the burnout that we're talking about again, but maybe there are some things where you might find some people who are regular members who maybe aren't even actively leading a ministry, but they are interested in doing some of the things like mental health, or education, or some of the other things that we're working on right now, like immigration and criminal justice, all those different things. So that is what that core team would be made up of. Is of that. I don't know if there's any comments or feedback so far from that. Our Zoom people got real quiet.
So Jamie, when you
Yeah.
get to outer rings, there
Yeah.
seems to be less investment too.
Mhm.
And it might be harder to recruit those people for a core team. Is
Mhm.
that something that comes up frequently?
Is that something that comes up for?
For voice in terms of training and
Yeah, and we like Voice will talk about like three kind of three kind of categories of leaders, because essentially, when you talk about the broad-based organizing, it requires, this core team representation, and it requires a lot of leadership. But you're always gonna have essentially like three different kinds of leaders. You're gonna have leaders that are like, really committed to what voice is, like that they're gonna be on anything that has to do with, the main stuff, that's going on all the time, anything that has to do with that those are like primary leaders. And then you have those secondary leaders that are like part of the core team that are pretty constant, but they're committed to the institution being the church, and so it's like the issues that are important for our church, those are the things that I'm about. And so like, as far as voice goes, like if voice is doing those things that we're big on, then count me in, like I'm in, on that. And then you have more of those like tertiary leaders that are like the ones that are, they can be called on for like the bigger things, they'll show up for the bigger actions, they'll be there. But in terms of just like the regular functioning of, they're not necessarily always going to be there and active, so.
One thing I've kind of been thinking about like this whole time, like I guess in high school and like just early growing up, I guess I thought that leaders were like, because I feel like I've always been a part of like leadership programs, were always people who were like extroverted and like super passionate and like kind of insane and like way out there. And then getting into the Presidential Leadership Council at UCO, it's kind of crazy how many different people I've met in that program. And there will be times that there are people who are like, oh, you're in that, well, I'm a junior, I'm about to graduate, so I shouldn't apply. I'm like, no, you should, because number one, they take all grades. But number two is it's like they literally take people that just are passionate about what they're passionate about and like being who they are in the interview process and like what they love and what they do. I think I've met more variety of people in this program than anything else I've ever done. Like it was cool you were talking about like the groups of people who have like similar issues, but I think if I had like continued, like if I didn't get into this program or I didn't even apply, I don't think I would have met as many people with as many like issues or like beliefs if I didn't do PLC. Which I know that it's offered at a lot of schools. OU has a good one, and OSU, I think Oklahoma City has one. But I think that the one at UCO is like so diverse and so complex that it's almost difficult whenever it's like just the leaders, because we're literally all different. But it's also kind of awesome because there are times that we realize like, okay, I'm a leader, but I'm gonna like step back and let that person lead for right now, and then I'll lead later. So anyway, I was just thinking about that.
But you like being across the diversity.
Yeah.
You enjoy that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's come to like make some of the craziest stuff. I mean, in high school, I felt like I was working in a 30% of the people were doing 70% of the work, and now it feels like 50-50. And it's just like, I didn't know if that was possible. I haven't seen that very often in a workplace, honestly. Maybe like in certain departments of a workplace, but I think most of the time it's pretty power over rather than power with. But this is very power with, because honestly, our advisor is not with us very often. She directs us, she tells us when things are happening, and she's at most of our events, but she's not constantly being like, this is what's happening. Like we're in a competition right now called Cheer and Dance, and it's literally me and about 20 other people in the PLC program that are going to choreograph and rehearse 2 days a week until March to perform a dance and compete with it. And our advisor's never there. Like it's just us. It's just us leading each other. We obviously have like coaches, but there's like 4 of them. And so
Yeah, you guys have strong organizing skills among yourselves that you guys make.
And we've been taking classes since freshman year on how to do this, how to argument safely, how to, yeah, like, we took a cultural analysis class last year about different people and about different, cultures, so.
Yeah, and what you're saying, you said is really important because it's like, that's what makes the broad-based organizing possible is the diversity. Like it thrives on the diversity. It has to have people from diverse backgrounds. It has to have diverse leadership. It has to have the relational power has to be really strong. Because if it's not, it's all gonna bottom under, so it's all about building that relational power and recognizing that the power is institutional and it's not persona led and persona driven, and I said this, I feel like for like the last 20 years, but when I was in college, I took a course on historical peacemakers, and it was all about MLK Jr. and Dorothy Day and all these just big people, Gandhi and all this, and I was wowed, of course, by them and how awesome they were. But also, I read, because of the way the class was structured, I read a lot about their public life. I read about the values that it was really simple in its structure. We would always research their public life, their actions, and then their values that they had, and then their private lives. And a lot of them just had a lot of struggles in their private lives, And so I just remember thinking, gosh, if there's so much pressure on that public figure to get everything right, the pressures on the family, the pressures on them as an individual are just going to be so huge. I would much rather be a part of a group of people doing something awesome than just having all of that pressure on one person to be the big thing, the next big thing. And I don't say that in any way to say like I got it more figured out than any of them, but that was one of my big takeaways from that class, was just to keep the peace, in my own heart, in my own life. I just want to be a part of something where a lot of people are striving for that balance, and striving in a way that I think that Jethro really hit it when he said, if we can do this, we're gonna stay strong, we're gonna stay healthy, have that solidarity, keep it going, through the end. And so I think that's the challenge that I want to leave with us as a church, but as a church that's invested in voice, and that is kind of what I have for you guys today. But
I think my main piece is just that last part that you were talking about. There's specifically about King. King knew a lot of things. I think he knew what Ella Baker knew in a lot of ways. Like he was well versed in the organizing that was happening. And there was a lot of deference to King when people were meeting. But there was also a lot of backdoor meetings without King to like or sometimes get around him as that personal figure, as like the face. And Ella Baker is a good example. The big six with the March on Washington is just a fascinating story, and something that's done really good with this recently is on Netflix, and it's called Rustin. That's a reference to Bayard Rustin, and Bayard was the central architect of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He was the guy that really knew how to organize people and how to organize institutions. And because of his sexuality, he got pushed to the back. So there's several scenes in that film that depicts a lot of the dynamics that like we're literally dealing with and have been talking about that. And so that made me think of that toward the end. We know we got weather coming in. We're going to be visiting some more this afternoon. but we do wanna take a little more time.
No,
for
we're not.
Yeah,
responses.
the voice thing is canceled.
The voice thing is canceled.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, yeah, that's good information, but also I was just thinking about like how long we're gonna be here. But I don't wanna cut anybody off, but responses to what we've been talking about.
I mean, the one thing that like always goes through my mind, so that I'm still trying to sort out. So I've been reading, like I read Dorothy Day's like autobiography, or listened to her autobiography last couple of weeks, and now I'm reading
Who was that?
Dorothy Day,
Oh, okay, yeah.
and now I'm listening to the biography written by her granddaughter, which includes a lot more of the backstory and a lot more of the personal stuff that happened between her daughter and her. And so it gets a little bit, muddier, when you're not reading it from Dorothy's perspective, of like her story, which is very interesting. But one of the things that was really like, I don't know where I picked up on it, but like Dorothy was really influenced by, she was already like a political radical, and she had this like spiritual, like kind of nagging, like she kind of just felt like there was something more than just, being, an anarchist or a communist, or, like trying to like make things better for the working people in New York where she lived. And so she was drawn to the church, and this guy, Peter Morin, found her out. And he was this like French kind of theologian and philosopher who really believed in centering like this new way of being in the world, like basically people like working hard, everybody like kind of being like personally responsible for like learning skills, farming, like and then like all like being like worker philosophers, kind of like going to school kind of like as a community, like learning some political organizing schools, but also like rooting that in your work together as a community. But it seemed like Dorothy and Peter had this difference in leadership where Dorothy was comfortable being like the leader, whereas Peter was like very much like, he didn't believe that model of organizing was sustainable, that it had to be distributed, like that, and that you couldn't like kind of like force values onto people that they hadn't already accepted. Like, and that's why he thought that the constant education was so important. It was like, yeah, you can't just as a leader impose your will and your values downward, but that the values that really change society have to come up like organically. And when I think about like voice, one thing I was just reading was like, Peter believed that like if you try to organize based on interest, then it always kind of draws to like this like selfish impulse that like doesn't necessarily, like your interest can come into conflict with a different marginalized group. Like if it's about self-interest, like, oh, we need the park in our neighborhood, not in that neighborhood. And so he was doing that thing where he wanted to value like principles and values like as a deeper level than like self-interest for organizing. And that's something that I've always like been uneasy with Voice's model, is like, what do I need personally as the center of the universe, of that concentric circle? And I understand both sides, but I haven't really like, I don't really understand, because King talked about the revolution of values, and that's something our friend Roberto used to talk a lot about. It was like, my self-interest is going to change once I see that my interests are connected to those who's like, maybe I'm not struggling with access to mental health care. So if my values don't transcend my own, between my own ears, then I don't have any interest in working on that issue. Like, but if I have a deeper basement, for my self-interest, including my community, like rooted in values of care and concern, then it does make sense. It is in my interest. And I feel like Voice doesn't really, I haven't heard a great like connection between, you know, like, you know, if you come to save me, blah, 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 but if you're, my
Right.
liberation is bound up in yours, like,
Right.
I feel like um, that is like, there is something there, like, that's deeper than my own interest, that I'm curious if you have any insight on.
Yeah, and I mean, like, because you always hear then from the voice perspective, like, you can't just be interest focused, because if you are, then we're not going to ever get anything done. So, you need to be willing to organize, organize for the sake of organizing. And I think we had some really good readings that went into that did explore that, and I can definitely look into them and see. But for me, I did catch a sense of that it was like the organizing is what matters, and not just the self interest. But yeah, I also felt bombarded by the readings. So it was like, hey, work full time and then read and pretend like you're a full time student, but just for a week.
What I've found is that these conversations are very unique. Like the history of like organizing on the left, it's not like lost, but it's like heavily suppressed. What is the Venn diagram with Catholic Worker and IAF? Like, because in all of my reading, it's like, where are the training manuals for CORE? Where are the training manuals for SNCC? Why aren't we still like teaching the same methods? It's like these things have been just like with everything else. They
Yeah.
just can't get pushed down
And I
and pushed
can't,
away.
I honestly, I can't wait until, like, I'm really hoping to have the opportunity to get into the national level of the training. And like, I'm the kind of person that needs repetition, and I need to, like, there's no way that you can just in those 5 days, and even that is a huge commitment of time to be able to go in and get that. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, where are these, and how can we dive into that and just absorb it? But yeah.
You have to be extremely cautious and careful when it comes to groups and who you identify with and find stuff in common with. I mean, a group can be in complete unity with one another and be completely wrong. I mean, take the people building the Tower of Babel. I mean, they were all unified and wanting to build that big old tower to heaven, but they were completely wrong in doing so. So, I mean, I think there's people out there that call themselves committees or groups to support or whatever, and then you get involved and you're like, no, this is not. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that comes back down to, first of all, people that organize and do it properly, and they do it for the right reasons, they tend to use the right resources, and they educate and they pull from resources that are unbiased, whereas people that have a certain agenda have very biased resources, and they don't care because what they're looking to do is prove themselves right. Whereas the other one may be more so focused on the education, even if it proves whatever it is wrong.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I mean, it is all about the facts of it. And if you are constantly looking for something that's biased, they're not going to be true. If that makes sense.
And a piece that I didn't go into in the action cycle is the importance of that education part. Like, really looking at what are the issues here, what is at hand,
Right.
not just jumping into something blindly, but in every action cycle there should be time invested in looking at what is going on finding out what are the dynamics behind it,
Mhm.
how do you want to move within it? And again, doing those power analysis to help figure out where is the best way to move. And I think what Elizabeth was going to talk about this afternoon was on that whole difference between making issues, talking about issues versus oh, I'll think of it. It'll come to me. An issue versus an issue is like overwhelming. It's
Mhm.
like impossible. But when you make an item, like a winnable item, like making something, carving it out, like poverty is an issue. But when you talk about, okay, how can we address,
An actionable, like.
an actionable item, that can address
Like a goal.
some aspect of poverty, this is something that we can actually, it's doable, it's something we can actually see happen, that's part of the action cycle. And then you evaluate it. And when you evaluate it, you look at, okay, did we really come through with our goals, with what we said we wanted to be? Were we consistent,
Right.
with who we said we were going to be? So
We've got Jeannie and Richard and Derek and Karen on Zoom. We'll pitch it to you as an option that you can take or not, just to create some space. Would you like to say anything?
Well, I was thinking about when it comes to committees and things, maybe you could make a prayer team or someone, or like a time for designated time for brainstorming, so more things can be added to the list or something.
I like that you mentioned prayer chain, because when Ralph gets the group together at Jeff's, he called it men's prayer breakfast. Completely different use of the word. It's very, whatever prayer means in this sense, it's communal, and it's a bit of more of what we're talking about than something sort of vertical. Yeah. I've got my brain's flying around this morning. I've got so many thoughts about autocracy, because government teacher, autocracy, and what Madeline said basically about populism, and about people of faith, and how that sometimes rubs up against how governments function in terms of majority rule and that.
Well, I was gonna say too, I mean, if you think about it, we tend to think through, a very narrow lens on what, I mean, just, it goes back to what Terry was saying about what is beneficial for you and what is in your scope, but what is beneficial for the masses may not always be beneficial for you. And sometimes it's more about the greater good versus, oh, well, we think this is best for everybody, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Jeannie's gonna say something.
Jean?
This has made me think about the team that we are on, the criminal justice team. And we're looking at a lot of very technical, practical things that happen to people when they're released from jail. And the more some of these people on this team have been studying this and learning more about it and getting the facts on it for years. And they know the information so well, they know each other, but we're moving into a stage where we're learning new things, and we're learning more of the nuts and bolts of how the system works and what causes certain things to happen for ex-prisoners that are unjust and cruel. And so now there's this situation going on where we're trying to say, okay, how can we, in such a huge, complicated state system, what can we actually grab hold of that we could be instrumental in making one change? But at the same time that I see us working on that practical thing together of trying to seize the little piece of power of action that we have, there is always in our meetings some conversation that even from those that have been exposed to it for years, longer than we have, there's some conversation that just builds and encourages the members to keep their eye on the big picture, which is don't lose your determination to find some mercy and some help for these people that are being treated badly. And, you know, when they used to go out to churches and give their real powerful presentation of the facts about it, I'm sure that they were speaking to many people within member institutions of voice that really weren't touched by these issues or didn't understand that they should be, I mean, they hadn't, in their house meetings, they hadn't come up with anybody who had experienced the pain of ex-prisoners enough to say a follower of Jesus, like we are in our church, needs to care about this, needs to have a passion about this, needs to do something. And so they had to do a lot of work just trying to inform people that weren't as far along in knowledge as they were. And we still, you know, fill that role some days of just trying to keep people's passion burning for this issue because it's discouraging. And what you can actually do is small. And you feel discouraged and you get tired of it. And some of us will probably be tempted to just give up and lay it down and go do something else. And so there's always that role of identifying what needs your power, what needs your action, but also staying strong. And I hope in our churches we're doing that for each other in all the things that we are concerned about as individuals. So that power has to sustain. It has to, you know, has to stay with people over time. It's not like you just discover it in a house meeting and then you're there and you keep moving forward. You have to help each other.
Thanks, Jeannie. We want to move on pretty soon. I want to make sure Karen wasn't trying to chime in and we had last thoughts in the room. Joys and concerns here pretty soon.
There was a glitch just a moment ago, so I lost the last little bit of what Jeannie said and you coming on, but I love this study and it's bringing up some really, really good points about organizing and focus and identifying. Like, I'd like to hear more about identifying interest in specific items, and I think that's to come. But I appreciate
I think the next word was Jamie. Oh. You back, Karen?
Is that on her end?
Sorry, Glenn,
I think
I
we can
didn't
hear,
hear what you just said.
go ahead, finish your thought.
Yeah, I think it glitched while I was finishing up. I was just saying, thanks to Jamie for bringing these lessons. I think it's very important, and it's also very valuable, and helps me wrap my head around how to identify the points of action and such as that. And I hope we can learn more about that.
Thanks. Joys, our response of thanks be to God concerns our Lord, hear our prayer.